Now, I'm very pleased to bring you an interview with a fiercely intelligent, dedicated and principled woman who's overcome enormous odds to achieve a spectacular feat, one that has even been noted by British PM Boris Johnson. Her name is Katharine Birbalsingh, and she is a black conservative woman who was and continues to be monstered for rejecting modern education dogma and all it entails. She's founded this free school called Michaela, and it is achieving just spectacular results, 4 times better than the national average, despite having students who are disproportionately from disadvantaged backgrounds. Let's listen to how she did it and why she keeps fighting. Katharine Birbalsingh, it's an absolute pleasure to speak to you. What you have achieved in Britain is astounding. Tell us a little bit about your school, Michaela, and what you went through trying to set it up.
Sure. Well, it was a group of us that wanted to set up a school that could do things a little differently. And we have free schools in England, which means that's possible. And it took us 3 years to make it happen because there were a number of people who tried to stop us. We had protesters outside. We had parents' evenings where they would infiltrate. So the detractors would infiltrate our parents' evenings and stand up in the middle of me talking and shout abuse at us. We actually had to hire bouncers at one parents' evening because we were so worried about the possible violence that might take place. So there has been a real struggle. When we finally opened, the protesters would hand leaflets to the children telling them that their lives were in danger because for health and safety reasons. But I have to say those days are long gone. And so we opened in 2014, and we just had our first set of GCSE results, which, you know, went really well. And we've got, you know, a typical intake from the inner city. Just so your viewers understand, you know, it's not unusual for a bunch of boys to turn up outside on bikes with their faces masked and they're carrying knives, waiting for our boys, or one of our boys, when taking one of his exams, in fact, came outside and was stabbed by a compass by a bunch of boys from another school. So, you know, it is a very tough area where we are, and the children are certainly disadvantaged, and yet we've come out with some really excellent GCSE results.
Well, you're underselling your achievement there because your results weren't just excellent, they were extraordinary. 4 times the national average. You had half your students, these students who are predominantly from poor socioeconomic backgrounds, and a lot of them have also learning difficulties. They achieved just the most remarkable results. Half of them got a grade of 7 or above, which is an A or an A plus in our grading, on at least 5 subjects. Tell us about how you achieved that, because it wasn't just throwing money at the problem. You've just got a different way of going about things.
That's right. That's right. So, I mean, yes, and we've had, our maths results, for instance, 1/4 of the children got the absolute top mark, which is a 9, which is an A++, actually. So it's true. Our results are really extraordinary, especially when you think about the disadvantaged backgrounds our children come from. And that's because we have very high expectations on behavior. So one thing people often talk about is that we have these silent corridors. And what it means is that the children move very quickly to their lessons. Other people who don't agree with us have an obsession with this idea that children should be able to run and shout and push each other in the corridors. Well, that obviously slows their time down for them getting their lessons. And then the other thing is that when they arrive to the lesson, they're so kind of high that it can take the teacher 10 to 15 minutes just to calm them down. That can happen in challenging schools. That doesn't happen at our school. They arrive very quickly to the lessons. They're to work immediately. And when you are trying to catch children up with their chronological reading age when they first join you at 11 years old, and that can take a couple of years, you want all of the time that the lesson gives you.
I was going to say quite a few politicians have come and visited your school, and when those results came through, those remarkable results, Prime Minister Boris Johnson even acknowledged them, and it acknowledged what you have achieved there. So do you think there will be an adoption of your methods a little bit more throughout the UK after all the hostility and resistance you've faced?
Yeah, well, there has been. And even in Australia, actually, because we get visitors from all over the world, and we've had Australian visitors, and they come and they take ideas, and certainly many, many visitors from across England, as you can imagine, and Scotland and Wales, who come and they take the ideas. Sometimes teachers in their classrooms who implement the ideas in their classrooms. Sometimes they implement the ideas across the school if it's a head teacher. Now, it's not just about discipline. I should just add that it's also the way in which we teach. So your older viewers will remember a day when at school, the teacher stood at the front of the class and led the learning, and the children followed the teacher, as it were. Nowadays, children are often in grouped desks, looking at each other instead of looking at the teacher, and the teacher is a facilitator of learning who moves amongst the desks, trying to keep the children on task. And the idea is that the child leads his learning, as opposed to the teacher leading his learning. Now, we don't do that at Michaela. At Michaela, it's the teacher who leads the learning. I always say the teacher is driving the bus, and it's the teacher's job to make sure that all of the children stay in the bus. And sometimes, oh, he's looking out the window, so he's jumped out the bus. Okay, got to get him back in. Come on, Johnny, let's go. Get back in the bus. And that way, you get to your destination with all the children in there. That is a very different idea nowadays in 2019. The more progressive ways have changed education, I would say, over the last 50 years, whereas 50 years ago, what I've just said was perfectly normal. So we have gone back to tradition. And we find it really does work. It helps children to learn what needs to be learned. And it gives them direction and structure and order, which I think children need. They feel safe in that kind of environment. They can trust the teacher to lead them to where they need to go. As opposed to, if you hand it all over to the children, then, well, actually, the bullies in the class are the ones who sort of take over. And then the other children who are a bit more shy and so on, they don't want to put up their hands. One of the things that I guess always say is, gosh, there's so many children putting up their hands in lessons. They're so engaged. And they are really engaged because the teacher is the one that's in charge. And I think that's an important point. We believe in the authority of the adult. And sadly, these days, the notion of authority has been given a bad name. And people think that it means authoritarian. So if you're in authority, they think, oh, you must be Hitler. And that just isn't the case. You can be an adult, you can be a parent, and be in a position of authority. Your 5-year-old shouldn't tell you what to do. It's okay for the parent to take charge.
Well, you said many of your children's don't have much, and certainly the statistics there are that there is a fair bit of disadvantage amongst your student population. Many of them are recipients of the free meal program, and majority of them have backgrounds where they're not, English isn't their first language, and yet their results are remarkable. Yeah. You do not stand for this bigotry of low expectations. You don't try to lower standards to appease that student population. You expect the very best from them. And that, again, is fairly radical in today's progressive education thinking.
That's right, because I think sometimes people feel that it's mean to expect a child who comes from a disadvantaged home to work really hard and meet the same high standards that you might have for another child who comes from a more supportive background. And in the moment, it might feel a bit mean because you think, oh, well, you know, he doesn't have the help from his mom at home, or dad is in prison, or is an alcoholic, or whatever the situation might be. But if you do that, if you let your standards drop for that child, in the end, who loses out? It's the child, because the child is never able to develop those habits over years, which will enable him to succeed later on in life. And then when entire communities, like your Aboriginal community, for instance, is a good example of this, when entire communities are struggling, then you have to ask, well, why? I remember reading an article once, in an Australian publication about how Aboriginal children, well, you know, the reading thing wasn't necessarily for them, and that we shouldn't push them so hard in this because it's not part of their culture. And I was thinking, this is crazy. These children have to grow up and have the tools that are necessary to be able to get on in life.
We've got these climate change protests happening. Students are being encouraged to attend, to wag school, to turn up to these things. What is your attitude to that? Is that something that you would support, your students taking a day off school to attend a protest?
No, absolutely not. Children will use any excuse to take a day off school. And it is, I find it absolutely maddening that people, I mean, there'll be a few, you know, at the top. Greta, obviously, it's a different story for her. This is her thing, and that's great. I'm really pleased for her, and it's great that she's so committed to a particular idea, and she's pursuing that. But for most of those children who are taking the day off, they're taking the day off because they want to sky school. That's what they do, right? And it's terrible to encourage them in this way. Why not do it on a Saturday? If you are so committed to the climate change issue, then use up your free time to go and support this idea. You already want to get out of school. You want an excuse to get out of school. So you're not giving up anything. When you demonstrate how committed you are to an issue, when you sacrifice. So when people go on strike, for instance, and they lose pay, right? They are sacrificing their pay for something that they believe in. The children aren't sacrificing anything. They are getting exactly what they wanted, which is an opportunity to skip out of school and to go off in the sunshine and to walk together and sing together and be happy and so on. And that's great. Do it on a Saturday. And then you'll persuade me that you really are interested in climate change. What you're doing instead is just being a bit dishonest. And what is even worse is that there are adults encouraging the children to be dishonest in this way. And it's just awful. We are teaching them all of the wrong things. And of course, our children are in school. Our children understand that what's important is them working hard, getting their GCSEs and making something of their lives. And then, you know, one day, because they've got the great GCSE results and they get to the best universities and they're able to speak articulately and so on, well, maybe one of them will make a difference to climate change one day. Great, right? This is a long game. Taking a day off school isn't going to achieve anything for anyone.